welcome back to Labels and Legacies, anticipating adjustments with Atif and some very special guests. This is our series of monthly free panel sessions from Diversity and Ability, where our CEO, Atif Choudhury, will be joined by expert speakers, and together they'll dive into a thought-provoking discussion on how adjustments are seen and put into practice, and how we can rethink them as well. And today's episode marks the end of our second series of Labels and Legacies. It's been over 6 months now of incredible and impactful insights from across the equity, diversity and inclusion sector. So today, let's set up our next steps by reflecting on what we can do to adjust a workplace to include everyone. So I'm delighted to introduce our two panelists for today. Firstly, as always, Atif is our chair. Atif Choudhury is a community advocate challenging perceptions of disability, neurodiversity and homelessness through his work as co-founder and CEO of Diversity and Ability. His work aims to reduce social, educational and digital exclusion among disabled, neurodiverse and homeless individuals. Atif has supported over 100,000 people and over 200 organisations through DNA's work. He was named a top community advocate in the Disability Power 100 of 2023 and sat on the judging panel for the Power 100 2024. And as well as DNA, Atif also co-founded Zaytoun CIC, a fair trade foods company supporting families and farmers in Palestine. He's also an advisor to the World Health Organization Rapid Assistive Technologies Board and a trustee for Disability Rights UK. And today we'd love to extend a warm welcome to our panelist, Maya Woodley, who is our very own Director of People and Operations here at Diversity and Ability. Maya brings extensive experience in operational strategy, safeguarding and inclusive people management, making her a recognised leader in building inclusive workplace cultures. With a master's degree in gender studies and a foundation in intersectional feminism, Maya combines a strong commitment to disability equality with dynamic and people-centred leadership. Known for driving impactful HR initiatives, she is passionate about creating exceptional workplaces that prioritise mental health and enable every individual to thrive. Alongside her role at Diversity and Ability, Maya also serves on the board of the Good Night Out campaign, advocating for safe and inclusive spaces, a role that highlights her dedication to promoting disability equality both within the sector and across society. So thank you for Maya for joining us today. I'll now hand over to Atif and Maya to begin the discussions.
Thanks, Ellie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's always exciting to do this work, and it's always emotional on a number of reasons. But today feels particularly great and challenging for two reasons. One is it's exciting and great for me because it's the first time we've had another colleague from Diversity and Ability joining us. That makes me excited, and it feels, I was thinking about it earlier, and it feels a bit like home, and that's nice. And that's a good thing. The other challenge is it could look like we're marking our own homework, but actually not, because it allows us to, I suppose, explore not just what we do well, but the challenges that we face. Some of the realism behind that challenge to make something real, and make sure that we're affording ourselves the space to really share with you all listening how at times easy this can be to make inclusion real, with the heart of it and the intent, and how we make sure that people feel that. Also recognizing that we've inherited so many wrongdoings, that we're in challenges of deficits and disorder models, and why people may not trust those, even within a disability rights organization or an inclusion rights organization. So it takes people not to just be implicitly trust that, but to action it and to do it. And I'm really excited because Maya gets to do that every day in the work. I get to see my learning grow through Maya and others in the team. And it's also lovely to share a vision and be part of co-production with people, but also see that we might not get everything done in this day, maybe not in this lifetime, but our commitment to saying, we're steadfast on this, that we're going to make inclusion real, not just for the person that's feeling a struggle or is hiding their differences, but because of the world we live in. And that thing matters because it improves our civil society. It tells us who's in it. And it tells us about the choices they make. And sometimes the choices they were not able to make. And I think that is a wonderful thing to be able to do, and to be able to say it and speak like this. as ever, I'm on my mind is some of the things that are happening geopolitically around the world. What may be a conversation about what EDI challenges are there, what's being clawed back. And I encourage all of you to think about that, to think about how we're motivated to stay true to our inclusion goals and how we might watch giant organizations in Silicon Valley change the course of that. But we can ask ourselves questions as well, which I think Maya will touch on in this work, of where is the sincerity if it's so easy to change or to cut back on just because a president has come or a different one has come? Was the sincerity ever there in the first place? Was EDI a conversation about performance behaviors or even public relations? Or was it a true commitment to make sure that diversity and inclusion is truly the heart of participation and that we get to safer, better places because of it? And that commitment doesn't waver, regardless of whether there's a president with a fairly bigoted outlook on the world. So give that some thought, because there may not be a clawback. It may be a moment of solidarity. It may be a calling and a rush to say, we're going to protect what we've got, and we're going to do it not just for ourselves, but for a generation of people that are dependent that we get this right and that we don't falter now just because there's been a change in the US election. So with that in mind, I want to just pause and say welcome to you all. And that's my way of saying hello, and saying hello to Maya. I'm going to ask Maya, feel free to comment on those things or not as well, Maya. But I'm going to start with my first question, which is, what does an adjusted workplace mean to you?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. It's a real treat to be here and to be part of this conversation, and looking forward to seeing how we unpack some of those huge things that you've just talked about. It does make the job at hand seem very big when we're thinking about it in the global context, in the wider political context. And yeah, sometimes it feels hard to break down those things into manageable sections, but it's definitely doable. Okay, so the question about an adjusted workplace, I want to answer that in kind of two different ways, I think. First of all, in a wholly positive and kind of succinct way, I think an adjusted workplace is a space where there's that shared understanding of how important inclusion and belonging actually are. So it's about attitudes and it's about culture, and on a practical level, where everyone's got the resources that they need to be able to do their job, right? Kind of that's the simplified version. But I do want to challenge a little bit the concept of an adjusted workplace, because the phrase itself kind of infers that there is a static version of an adjusted workplace, right? But actually that doesn't exist. And an adjusted workplace is one where you've got flexibility, you've got an understanding that things will need to keep changing depending on who the people are in that community, in that organization, and that there is a willingness for those things to keep evolving and keep changing. So while you can kind of make a definition of what an adjusted workplace is, I think you need to challenge that all the time. Otherwise, you're not doing the job in the way that it needs to be done, because those things are going to need to keep changing depending on the jobs that we're talking about, the people that we're talking about, the barriers that are being faced.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Absolutely. It reminds me so much of that kind of there's almost this panacea of universal design, and it's an aspiration. It's not a finish line, It's a bit like accessibility. It's never a finish line. It's but where it becomes problematic, I guess, is when people say, no, we're 100% this, or we're 100% accessible, or 100%,
Yeah, but I think it's difficult for people to acknowledge that there's not a destination. There's not a final destination. People need to be comfortable with the fact that they're going to be continually challenged on the things that they're doing, and because that's not a comfortable space for people to be, and it shouldn't be. And I think we need to get used to the idea that even when you've done one thing, you've changed a job description to be in your eyes, in everyone's eyes, the most inclusive it can be. Well, that is going to keep changing. And so we've just got to get used to that. And we've got to get really comfortable with those conversations around how we can keep evolving those things.
Yeah, no, great. I love it. Yeah. So my next question is, I guess it gets to the pragmatism here as well, because I think we touched on the philosophies and the feelings, and the question is how do you embed those listening, thinking, yes, we agree, we believe in those things? And I suppose there is that question of those who are listening to us as well, because they've chosen to listen to us and be attendees here. But if we were imparting, and what DNA gets to do is to teach this around the world, how do we make the anticipatory welcome real? What do we mean by it? How do you embed and encourage adjustments at each employee cycle or each point of the cycle? Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts of that? And what might you say to, I guess, a lived experience dynamic where they're feeling that challenge, but not sure if people above them are hearing it?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think the last part of the second question there is how I want to start my answer. And that is that it absolutely needs to start with leadership, and that the leadership of organizations need the space and the time and the in-depth opportunity to explore, either in a training context or, in some kind of group space, what that looks like, what adjustments look like in that context, because you need the leadership to be demonstrating good practice, to be deeply involved in the communication around adjustments across all levels of the organization from the outset in order for it to be a success. So I think it's really important that it starts with leadership, and not in a kind of theoretical sense, in a very practical sense. Mm-hmm. You just need involvement and buy-in from the top in order for that to cascade throughout the organization. And I think, practically, a lot of the stuff around embedding adjustments looks like having conversations with people, and having conversations with people needs to happen, and however difficult the conversations may be, at every stage of the employee life cycle. So before interview, it needs to happen at interview, post-interview, in the onboarding process. And because what you'll find is that these conversations will look different at every stage of the employee life cycle because of the trust that's building and hopefully the sense of belonging that people are starting to build in their roles and in their organization. And people's disclosure and their comfortability around talking about the barriers that they face, and also their lived realities will change over time. So the conversations need to be consistently happening throughout different stages. I think internal communication about these kind of things is absolutely vital. Once somebody's in post, they need to be hearing stories, and they need to be hearing the celebrations of when things have changed for a person and adjustments have been put in, or their role has changed slightly, or whatever it may be. And those need to be marked as celebrations across the organization, if the employee is happy with that, because that storytelling and that communication around these things and the celebration of those things will help to reduce some of the shame that people might be feeling about stepping forward and disclosing, and also then really kind of embeds that culture of the adjustments and change, and the adaptability of roles and the organization are a key part of it. I think those are my main ones.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. I mean, I would say this to leaders everywhere, and I say this to myself too, because this is almost when you are leading departments or teams, there's this want to get everything right, and of course that lives at the heart of this for so many leaders. I mean, of course there are leaders who don't, but I don't think that's the focus here. But the focus is really about saying in the heart of this is this wish to get everything right, to meet everybody's needs, and to make sure everybody feels heard. And in that space, we're not psychic, and nor should anybody feel they're supposed to be. And those listening today, those who have influence on HR teams or made of them, to not put that pressure to be psychic, but it is to recognize, as Maya said here, that it does start from the top. And it does need that leadership to be anticipatory. It says, I'm not psychic, but I can recognize that this might be hard for this person. I can recognize that even if it was easier for this one, doesn't mean all the colleagues feel the same thing. And so we create a bridge to say, what is that process teaching me? And can leaders be open to that? Can they be open to hearing those things?
Yeah, and it's about listening skills, isn't it? And maybe it seems like such a basic skill in a way, but it's actually a very complex thing to do, and it needs to be practiced, and spaces for good listening and good contribution from the wider team needs to be really carefully facilitated, and that needs to be really thought through, like what does listening to the employee team look like in your particular context, in your particular organization.
No, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, and it's a much more active muscle than we realize, listening itself. Much more demanding on us to really put us through the paces in it than we think. And sometimes we think it's just a passive thing, but it's not. I know when I've done it well and when I haven't, and I've reflected on moments where I felt, yeah, that was good. And then times I thought, no, I did not hear that. My own emotions were in the room far stronger than they needed to be.
And I think that employees will, it can't be underestimated how important it will be for employees to feel like they are heard and listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. So my question is, I suppose with that in mind, what is the biggest challenge in implementing, with this in mind, to adjustments at an organizational level? And feel free to draw on experience of DNA, but also anything you want outside of it. What I mean, in terms of, what is the biggest challenge?
I think the biggest challenge, and there are lots of challenges, and big challenges, small challenges, but the biggest challenge I think across the board is undoing the assumptions in ourselves and in others about what certain roles and work and job actually looks like, because I think we come with a lifetime of history of our previous jobs, of seeing depictions of jobs even, and we go, that's what this role looks like. And we, then kind of working with people who are challenging that idea of what that role looks like, what this workspace looks like, what good looks like in that role, I think is really difficult for us to challenge that for ourselves. And it requires a lot of undoing, and then that's in itself quite a lot of it's a lot of work to do, to go, okay, well, I'm going to shake off everything that has come before, all of the things that I know to be true about this job, about this role, and I'm going to rebuild it in a different way. And because the responsibility will be on HR leaders, on line managers, on organizational leaders to provide the structure and the support around these roles. So if you are reshaping it in a new way, it's not a small task. It's a big undertaking. But I think we just need to be prepared to do that, because that's when we're really going to see people that have previously been excluded from certain jobs, certain roles, certain organizations. We're going to be able to see them bring their diversity and their strengths into these spaces. And until we really do challenge what we know to be right and possible, I don't think we're going to be able to get there.
Yeah. Often we carry, and I don't know, it's up for the audience, I guess, for you to chime in on this and use the chat as well. Just a provocation here. But I wonder, I know from my own experience, certainly long before I had any leadership titles, I would hear the idea of, my door is always open. And I appreciate that. But I always used to wonder, really, dude, it's really hard to walk through your door, for a number of reasons. But not necessarily because it's their fault, but because of histories, the ones we carry in our heads and our hearts. And the challenge is, so sometimes we can take a workplace and a workplace culture that we had that might have been unkind or oppressive, and the impact that has can create a sort of trust deficit, of how is it happening again? Or we sometimes feel emotionally locked into a space where it's not safe to say these things because when I worked here, it didn't work for me. And then this organization is coming out saying they want me to tell them stuff, but I don't know if I tell them stuff, will it be like last time, you know? And I suppose it's also going back to that familiarity of what looks safe to you in leaders. What is it when leaders are made up of perhaps at times a different class of people, or a different way of language, or a different, it could be a different race, it could be a different. So it's figuring out, I suppose, and I loved how you just talked about this unlearning, the kind of shaking off. And I suppose it's our collective responsibility. It's ourselves to shake off, to say, I recognize that this is my fear talking, and it's not necessarily here, but that fear helps me survive at times. It's my friend at times. But sometimes it may not be helping me see what's gifted to me here in this new culture or this new place. Or it's not letting me inform the practice of this organization that really wants to get it right, because I'm not sure if I'm ready to trust it yet. And that's okay. It's okay within reason. But I think it's also okay to have that sense of self-reflection and perhaps even self-ownership to say, what happens if I meet you halfway? What happens if I meet myself halfway? To say, I feel like I'm going to try and be safe here. They've got to not be psychic and they can't know those things, but they seem to be inviting me to tell them things. You know, we sort of joke around on this about things like whole self days, and I think they are really good initiatives. But really, as I said before in the past, perhaps, that these invitations can be impositions, you know, because they don't really recognize what does it mean. And it's very hard for somebody who's not in a sense of power in a job or an organization to say, well, my whole self looks like this. Did I say too much? Did I say too little? So these are great questions. So I guess my back to you is that it's great because the unlearning means that we're living less in our heads and our anxieties. Sometimes they do inhabit us, but they also allow leaders to actually foster something that says, I can unlearn my assumptions. My assumptions have power. I can unlearn some of the things that aren't serving us, you know?
I feel like there was a huge amount of unlearning that happened when everyone changed their working life for COVID, right? And disabled people had been saying for years that we know that there's more, you know, there's different ways of doing these jobs. And then suddenly everyone was like, yeah, there's different ways of doing these jobs. And I think we need to remember that happened and keep open-minded when people tell us that there's a different way. Instead of going, but we've always done it this way, we need to say, okay, let's see what's possible, because it's really likely that we just can't, you know, our brains are only so malleable until we really push them, and we don't know what's possible unless we kind of get out of our comfort zone with things and with the way in which things have happened before. And I think we need to just remember that there was, you know, in a very recent history, a point in time when everyone changed their mind about stuff that disabled people had been asking us to do for a long time, and not let that get washed away just because it's a few years down the line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I hope everyone can hear that. There's so much richness in this. To imagine that we could have tackled the disability employment gap the same, when we talk about physical differences at least. In 2012, we could have said, well, we need people to work from home, have adjustments at home so that participation can be measured. Well, we had Skype back in 2012. We had it in 2002, you know, but the answer would have been, we can't do that because how will they do any work? How will we know they're working? How acceptance? We could have had the same question and the same answer would have been, well, how will we know they're working? How do we know? We can't do that. And we'd have said we can't do that right until 2019, right? And then 2020 comes along and says, you've got no choice. And this is about everybody facing a disabling barrier. And you're dead right. And we could have tackled the disability employment gap much, much harder sooner in terms of physical differences. And so I guess could we have anticipated that? And do you think that the anticipatory welcome that DNA talks about, that it is our role not to be psychic, it's okay not to be psychic, but it is our role to anticipate that people won't be safe to tell us things because of historic reasons or even current ones. Do you think in the light of COVID, could we have anticipated that we could have got this right? And do you think there's things around the corner that we could be anticipating? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think we can't be psychic. We don't know what's around the corner. But I think what we can be doing is moving forward with the understanding that disabled and neurodiverse people are already part of all different organisations and communities, even if they're not open about it, even if there's not disclosure, even if there's not self-understanding about what the barriers might be, right, depending on the context and the organisation. And I think it's the organisation's responsibility to just be forward thinking about the changes that might be possible in their specific context and just make them anyway, make them preemptively on the basis that everyone could be facing these barriers and you just don't know about it yet. And that to me is what the anticipatory welcome should be about. Because, if there are organisations that are thinking, I want to get prepared, but there's no one currently that's disabled that works for us. Well, that's not true. There absolutely is. There's people facing barriers, there's neurodiverse people and there's disabled people in every organisation. More than we know, more than we think. And it's an organisation's just responsibility to just move in any way that they can do, and it shouldn't just be one person's responsibility. That shouldn't all just sit with the CEO or the head of HR or whoever. It is a collective responsibility to think about the ways in which we might anticipate all different kinds of barriers, and that requires listening, as we've said, reflecting on what our assumptions are. It requires creativity. It requires going, what it might be out of the box, but let's just try it this way and see if it helps someone. And I think that's also, it's not also always a challenge to do those things. Sometimes that's a really fun thing to do. Sometimes that's a really great way to get employees together and involved in thinking about how to make this environment more accessible, how to make this particular task more accessible to more people. And I think that's the responsibility. That's the anticipatory welcome. It should be, everyone's involved in it, and it should be done no matter who you think is facing those barriers.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, it's really chimed with me, the amount of meetings that I've had in the past where perhaps we're talking to an organisation that's brought us in to deal with one issue or two issues, or what they see as problems rather than just people. And just healthy participation. Mm-hmm. And sometimes there will be things like, oh yeah, we don't have many disabled people here. And again, you're absolutely right. They nailed it. On what basis do they determine that to be? And I suppose there's so much to be said here, which we need more time for. On that, we've inherited the idea of this is a disability and this is a disabled person. What we haven't understood is two things, and you've touched on it already. One is that it's a collective responsibility. And I think that I like to use the language of collective liberation in that same way, that we have a collective understanding. What is the future? What's our stake in this? What's our stake, not just to our colleagues and our loved ones, but also the people we'll never meet. But we did things to make it easier for them. But it's also co-production, and I think this is a great thing for people to lean into. It's tough for a lot of leaders when they feel like they've got to wear so much of that responsibility on their heads alone. And sometimes I think, and I get this joy with you, particularly in this moment, as it's you, head of people at DNA, is you wear this space to realize, yeah, you're not on your own. You get to be with people who feel this like you do. And so I guess the question of how people, because the word belonging is used all the time, and I've always said this, I struggle with words when we don't determine what they mean by them, like belonging, like inclusion, even intersectionality. These things can be co-opted just to pepper the word into an organization's event as if by magic it's appeared. Mm-hmm. When these things are actions, they're not just descriptions of things or theories, they're actions. So if I'm thinking about even DNA's own language on this, which is an action, to not be psychic, but to anticipate, to be part of something that says, an action is, as you've described, co-production. If we did this together, not only will it inform practice, but it might raise your stake in it. It might build your psychological sense of healing or safety. Say, wow, they're actually asking me. They want to know how I do this. I worked in many places that would never do that. I was just, never occurred to me there was an alternative, and I didn't really see one modeled around me particularly in my, I'm 51, so folks, it's okay. But it's what we do for a generation that are here now and a generation that are going to come that are maybe at school now. So if I was using the language of sort of the anticipatory welcome, and so it's not just a word, and it's an action, or it's an evidence, or it's a culture, or it's an idea of belonging. Can you give an example of, from your personal perspectives, of what it means to you?
Yeah, so like from a personal perspective, my kind of journey through what it means to work in an organisation like Diversity and Ability, and with that anticipatory kind of approach, changed quite drastically because in 2020 I was diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, which meant that my I guess the way I moved through the world was going to change from that point onwards. Chronic pain and fatigue and all the things that come with these kind of conditions was going to be a feature of my life. And prior to that, I hadn't really faced many barriers to work, or mostly I'm very privileged to say that, up until that point, I hadn't really faced any barriers, notable barriers really. But that did change quite drastically in 2020. And now the environment that I was in Diversity and Ability was one that was already kind of providing this space where people had been welcomed into the organisation that faced a variety of different barriers themselves, and spoke about that openly. And we very much, I was already in a culture where people had flexibility around their working life, came with their lived experience, and that was prioritised in lots of ways. So that that was not only just through the services that we provide, but also, as an employee culture and space. And so I was able to accept this, new feature of my life, and speak about how that was going to impact me and my working life in a way which I don't think I would have been able to do if I wasn't in this space. So it was really, it felt very safe to be able to speak about the things that I was going through, and to be able to know, because I'd already seen it enacted and I'd been part of enacting it for other people, what that would look like to have loads of hospital appointments, and what that would look like to need to flex my work a bit more than usual based on the symptoms I was facing at the time. I just think that would have been completely different if I was in a space where I hadn't seen and been part of and spoken to so many people about how that looked for them. There's a whole huge thing that you have to go through when, kind of life changes in that way, self-acceptance and some of that kind of nervousness around what's that going to mean for me and my future. But being in a space where people were already so comfortable about talking about that, and that we had already got loads of practical things in place to be able to facilitate, flexibility and change for people facing barriers, meant that I was able to feel much more confident than I would have done when that happened. And so I think that's, I think that's completely kind of changed that the trajectory of that change in my life, being in this space. And I'm really, really glad and grateful that I was able to be around such wonderful people while I was navigating such a difficult thing. And that's, that's I was already doing my job at that time, already doing that for other people. But that's why I think I can really, everyone that's involved in kind of putting adjustments in place for people and creating work environments where people can be honest about the barriers that they're facing, and then also there's action that could be taken around those things to support people in work. I just think that is just one of the most valuable things that you can do, because it's obviously we have our work life and we have our out of work life, and but we spend a lot of time at work, right? Mostly. And so it's really, really important that the space that you're in is one that can accommodate whatever, you need to bring to the table. And so, while I don't think there should be any pressure for people to bring their whole selves to work, I don't think that's a fantasy that, we don't need to aspire to. But I think that we do need to be able to bring some really key parts of ourselves to work. And I think that creating a space where people can be honest about those things is hugely, hugely important.
Yeah. I don't say thank you for sharing so much of that, particularly the personal side of it, and sharing it with me, but also sharing it with those listening in the world. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great testimony to be able to recognize that even a small organization, and diversity and ability is not a big organization. It's about how we keep steadfast to the values we have, to say we can see that we are stronger, not despite the disabilities or the barriers that people face, but through them. That they give us grace in the world to teach other organizations that they can do it too. And sometimes we can look at giant organizations and think, cracky, you've got the resources. Why is this such a mystery? But it's okay. It's okay. That's what we're here for, to help organizations do that. But I strongly believe that there is a debt that we owe to difference, that it teaches and informs. But the emphasis on trust has to be earned. Mm-hmm. That the organization just can't just say we're inclusive. It has to define that. It has to say what is ahead of it that makes that hard. And it talks about relentlessly the imperfections perhaps, but the sincerity always. But this is the work that we do. This is what we believe in. This is why we do it. This is why it makes it hard. But this is why we gain so much when we do it this way. I think you're right. I think I'm touching on this as well. For those listening as well, and please use the chat as well. Anything that we say that you think, that's great, or no way. But if you think about it, those of you listening who are perhaps a little bit older, or my generation, mental health was not a conversation in the workplace largely. Back to the 1990s, it meant you were bipolar, for example, or schizophrenia was the common language used then. Why would you talk about that? Why would you tell anyone about it? What would possibly be in your interest to say that in the workplace? And yet mental health in the workplace, in terms of absenteeism, presenteeism, the impact of dealing with how to support people through that, it's actually cost the UK economy £38 billion a year. This is 5% of the UK's GDP. It's huge. So it's really difficult financially, commercially, when we don't talk about this stuff. It costs us more. We save money when we do talk about it. But we've had to move from the 1990s position 30 odd years ago to where we're at now to talk about well-being, and that we all have a physical health, but you cannot have a physical health without a mental health agenda. You cannot separate the two. They affect each other all the time. When we've got a cold, we feel rotten, and we feel rotten in our heads. But when we don't feel safe to say that, or as I used to do when I was having a bad mental health day, I'd sort of cough down the phone, pretend I'm sick, or I'm not well. But I'm not well. I'm mentally not feeling good, but I'm having to cough in order to say something. That's not right. And so when an organization is open to that, to say, okay, I need my team to be able to say they're okay. And if they're not, then I need to hear it. And if they just say, I'm physically fine, but I'm mentally not well, that's enough. Mm-hmm. It is always enough. And it's amazing for me to see the workplace change in that time. I promise it wasn't the workplace in offices at all, but it largely to the great work that many organizations have done on EDI, on inclusion, both around the world and in the UK, to make mental health so important, to recognize there is no, as I said, mental health agenda without no health agenda without a mental health one. And it's precious of what we've achieved in these last 30 years. It definitely needs to grow to employ an understanding towards, say, blue-collar workers who are not in offices to deal with conversations about who, and I love Minds campaign and different campaigns on this and who's in your corner. But I guess my question is that when we see the evolution of this, we sort of recognize it is absolutely the responsibility of HR heads, for sure, to build mechanisms for this. But the best, and nobody, and I stress this, nobody works in HR that doesn't care about people. No one goes into that role that says, I'm not about people. But I guess the hardest part is knowing that this isn't just about HR. As you've said, you're people manager at Diversity and Ability. You get to do something that is brilliant. The intimacies of knowing what really makes people thrive here and makes them feel safe. It's my responsibility too, but you get to do that with probably more intimacy that sometimes the CEO gets to do, unless the CEO role model something. It's very difficult to ask. The culture of any organization, including DNA or diversity, isn't what I say. It's what the newest member of the team says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that what I get to see a lot in the team is the fact that by having kind of open conversations around mental health and well-being, as well as the barriers that people face and adjustments that are being made, I actually have seen a direct correlation over the cohesion of the team because of these conversations. And so there's not just that relationship with the organization and the mechanisms that we put in place, but there's a relationship that is built with each other as colleagues that I think is really, really effective because of these conversations, and kind of harks back to my own journey with it has been very much, in relation to the organization, but also with the people that form the organization. And I, ultimately, if we're thinking from a HR perspective, where there's really, really good team cohesion, where there's really good sense of empathy across the team in a way that is, supportive and solution focused, that can really strengthen the team. And that means that a team's going to be able to achieve results in a meaningful way too.
Yeah. That is absolutely true. A team that is able to be authentic together is a team that can understand each other. A team that's masking is a team that cannot possibly understand what others are going through. And if it doesn't share that empathy, then it doesn't share that mission. Mm-hmm. What it has is presenteeism. What it has is people who feel they're having to hide an awful lot because they don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely right. I think it's just amazing that we get to do this as a team to HR leaders, but ultimately what makes it real isn't HR leaders. It's just that sense of everyday belonging, that this is just what we do around here. I feel amazed that we get to do that as an organization to organizations. I get amazed that I'm in an organization that gets to do that as well. But I'm also, I guess we're coming to the end of the podcast, but I am sort of, maybe if I circle slightly to the beginning of what I said, is the world does pivot on, I guess, on social changes, moral panics or big things that can happen that affect us. We are going to see some challenges in the year that we're in, not just from the US state in terms of the presidency or the culture or the rhetoric that's going to come from there, but also billionaires impacting the way we do work or the kind of work we should focus on. It's a challenge, and with it is going to come, I hope, the sincerity to reject that, to call on our mission of inclusion and the protection of that even stronger. But it won't be easy, There will be folks who care about these things but see their budgets cut. There will be folks who will have strong agendas, but they will see their agenda moved away from them because of X, Y, Z. Even when you talked about COVID, I kept thinking how amazing, and I do mean this, the sincerity in which I got to conversations with directors and leaders around the world, because it wasn't about persuade me. It was about, wow, I wish I knew this sooner. And right now we're in a crisis. How can we work together? And I really deeply appreciated the speed in which people understood the urgency of the work and what it meant in people's lives. And I also deeply think that we are going to face a challenge, but we're going to see the best of us come up in this space. The realism that we've always needed, that it wasn't about posturing or diversity calendar days or things like that. It was just about people and how we protect them. So I guess with that, I'm really hopeful that we're going to see that challenge and we're going to see people in it rise to it. And we're going to see, I guess, the giant organizations that were about PR more than anything else step away from it. And if that's what it happens, then so be it. But I'm going to ask you a question, Maya, which is, with all these things in mind and everything we've talked about and absolutely anything outside of that, just what keeps you hopeful?
I think that what keeps me the most hopeful is that we don't even know what's around the corner in terms of adjustments and inclusion and accessibility. And I mean that, in a very practical sense. Like, we don't know what the tech's going to look like in 5 years' time. Like, we really don't. We don't know what the new frontier of inclusive recommendations are going to be in 10 years' time. And that's so exciting, because, right back at the start of these questions, I said, I've just lost my train of thought, sorry. I think that basically we just don't know, and it's okay that we don't know, and it's exciting that we don't know, and that there's going to be so many changes and exciting possibilities that are brought to us by, in my role. I'm sure that will be through employees and applicants that I meet that say, these are the barriers I'm facing, here's how it might work, and we'll have that conversation, and I'll go, wow, I didn't even think of that before, and that makes me really hopeful. And I also think that we are going to see, we already are seeing a lot of shared understanding that it's really important that we prioritize neurodiversity in a way. We're seeing a much better kind of societal acceptance and acknowledgement that there are very real barriers that people are facing because of things that, 5 years ago were just being brushed under the carpet. And I think that makes me really hopeful too, because as, the younger people in our society bringing that confidence to talk about these things forward, we're going to see so many new and exciting options and opportunities to just improve the things that we're already doing. So that's what makes me really hopeful.
Great. Maya, thank you so much. It was really lovely to finish on that. I think there is so much here. As I said, Ellie's probably put in the chat, but please, guys, do use it. Whatever keeps you hopeful, what is it that motivates you? What would you like from diversity and ability to help support your HR teams? These are challenges that you're not on your own facing them, and it's just, for me, it's been really lovely to do the first, I guess, we've done quite a few of the Labels and Legacies podcasts, but it's the first one we've done where it's just the DNA team together, in this case, Maya and I at least. And it allows us to sort of reflect on it, and I meant it, that there is positions here that we look for, not necessarily perfection, but certainly sincerity. One, as Maya said, is that it's not complete, nor should it be really, but it allows people to inform a process, to strengthen its participation, to continuously ask, what does co-production look like? What does healing look like? What does health look like? What does a meaningful space look like when you're in that space more times than you are with your children, your loved ones, your hobbies, you're with colleagues? So let's make it matter. So I want to say thank you from me, from my heart, and hand to Ellie, and just and please just join this mission. Ellie, over to you, and I think I'll mute. I hope that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who've been sharing in the chat in answer to the questions or reflecting on what Atif and Maya have said today. And please do keep that coming as well. And we'll be sharing a screen shortly, which will give you some information about how you can keep in contact with us. So yeah, thank you both. Some really high impact stories there and also suggestions for change too, alongside that reminder that change will absolutely be a constant for diversity and inclusion. Like you both said, there's no finishing line to that. So what can we do to support and engender those changes and make sure that they feel like an evolution, like a really positive and powerful evolution over time? So as I mentioned, this is our last episode of this series. So that's it from us for now, but you don't have to go without, because we'll be releasing every episode from this series as a podcast, which will be available on Spotify. And that will be alongside a comprehensive and holistic written guide to workplace adjustments too, and all through that same lens that Maya and Atif have discussed today. So adjusting being one quite small part of a wider anticipatory policy and culture as well. So you don't want to miss that. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter to get first access to those freebies. Yeah, there's a QR code on the screen now, and we'll also paste a link to that in the chat too. Also, as Atif said right at the end there, these are challenges that you're not on your own in facing. So if you want to make sure that your employees can feel that same feeling of value, of welcome and safety that Maya's discussed today, we can support you with that too, and make sure that you don't feel on your own, whether that's with workshops and training bespoke to your teams or whatever else that you have needs that you need filling. So you can scan the second QR code on the screen now, or just drop your email in the chat if you'd like to find out more about how we can help you. And thank you once again to everyone who's shared in the chat today and attended as well. It's really impactful to see those responses. We're really grateful for everyone involved for taking on this space so sincerely as well. And remember that final question. So what keeps you hopeful? You can continue that conversation by sharing on social media using that hashtag Labels and Legacies. And we'd love to know more about what's giving you hope in 2025. And thank you again to Atif and Maya for joining us today. And thank you all for attending, and we'll see you in the future.